Canada's most powerful bureaucrat says he doesn't believe the former Attorney General was pressured to settle the SNC-Lavalin criminal case. His statement was part of a remarkable exchange as the first witnesses caught up in this controversy begin to testify here in Ottawa. Michael Wernick is Canada's top civil servant, and he delivered a sharp rebuke to accusations. His testimony offers new details on a story that has been shrouded in secrecy. Not only that, he also made unexpected comments about the state of public discourse in this country. We'll get political analysis of all of this with our At Issue panel a little later, but let's begin with David Cochrane and the jaw-dropping session on Parliament Hill.
The Justice Committee wants Jody Wilson-Raybould to speak her truth. Today, Michael Wernick spoke his.
The Globe and Mail article contains errors, unfounded speculation, and in some cases is simply defamatory.
In extraordinary testimony, the clerk of the Privy Council offered public comment on private meetings that are part of a political scandal, giving a broad defense of the government he serves.
In my observation and my experience, they have always conducted themselves to the highest standards of integrity. You may not like their politics or their policies or their tweets, but they have always been guided by trying to do the right thing.
Wernick also offered specific insights into key moments of the SNC-Lavalin timeline. Of note, he corroborated the Prime Minister's version of his September 17th meeting with Wilson-Raybould, during which Trudeau says he reassured her that she would make the final call on SNC-Lavalin.
He indicated that it was entirely her call to make, that she was the decider. And that is a message. That is a message that the Prime Minister conveyed to the Minister on every situation that I'm aware of that it came up.
Wernick also released letters from December showing the Prime Minister turning down meetings with SNC's top brass, telling them to speak to Wilson-Raybould.
At every opportunity, verbally and in writing in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was the decision for the Minister of Justice to take.
But there is also a December 19th phone call Wernick made to Wilson-Raybould, a call that could be interpreted as pressure, a call in which Wernick mentioned SNC-Lavalin and consequences.
I conveyed to her that a lot of her colleagues and the Prime Minister were quite anxious, was conveying context that there were a lot of people worried about what would happen, the consequences, not for her, the consequences for the workers and the communities and the suppliers.
The question is whether that call was improper pressure, or if Wilson-Raybould could interpret it that way.
I think the matter may come down to the Ethics Commissioner's view on a conversation between two people, between what was sent and what was received.
The Ethics Commissioner is conducting a review, but the opposition has already reached a verdict.
I think the testimony is stunning. I think the amount of pressure that the Prime Minister's office, either through his own operatives or through the clerk of the Privy Council, is incredibly unprecedented.
Okay, David, there were certainly new details of what happened, maybe details for the first time, but there's still lots of gaps in all of this.
Yeah, we still have nothing from Jody Wilson-Raybould, no specifics from her, though we expect that will change when she testifies at this committee next week. We expect that's going to happen on Tuesday, and we're clearly going to want her version of that September 17th meeting with the Prime Minister, her version of the December 19th call with the clerk, and how she perceived both of those events. And Rosie, there's another key event here we don't have anyone's version of, and that's a December 5th meeting between Wilson-Raybould and the Prime Minister's former top advisor, Jerry Butts, at the Chateau Laurier here in Ottawa. That has been highlighted as a key moment in this. Butts, in his resignation statement, says he has done nothing wrong. We will obviously want to hear Wilson-Raybould's version of what happened at that meeting. And Rosie, if you listen to Michael Wernick today, she should be able to be quite expansive on what she says, because in his view, Wernick says solicitor-client privilege does not apply here at all. So in his view, Wilson-Raybould should be free to speak her truth. We'll find out next week.
And on it goes. David Cochrane, again on this story for us tonight in Ottawa. Thank you.
You're welcome.
At the center of how things unfolded today, though, a man in a non-political job. Michael Wernick is the clerk of the Privy Council, and some have criticized the non-partisan today of his overstepping into his role and being even too partisan. But just what is his job, and why is it important to our democracy?
I occupy a position that has existed for almost 800 years. the King's councillors and advisors. That is exactly what the Privy Council oath is, to be a true and faithful advisor to Her Majesty.
The job of Canada's highest ranking and most powerful bureaucrat is to support the Prime Minister and Cabinet on policy and governance issues. Working with 900 other civil servants in the Privy Council office, the goal is to give advice to make sure the government runs properly. The non-partisan nature of Canada's public service is something Wernick spoke about when he became clerk of the Privy Council in 2016.
Our job is to do the very best we can to deliver the agenda of the governments that Canadians elect, and that's the non-partisan support. Every government should be able to count on the public service to step up and work really hard to deliver the agenda that they put to Canadians.
Indeed, governments of all stripes have counted on Wernick, a veteran civil servant. He joined the public service in 1981 when he was just 23. Before landing the job, Wernick was Deputy Minister for Indigenous Affairs.
I worked very closely with three active prime ministers, former active ministers, a dozen ministers. I've seen cabinet meetings of the Chrétien cabinet, the Mulroney cabinet, the Martin cabinet, the Harper cabinet, and the Trudeau cabinet.
Michael Wernick also said today that he's deeply concerned about Canada's politics and where things are headed, even calling out some controversial comments he found particularly distasteful at a pro-pipeline rally on Parliament Hill this week.
I know you've rolled all the way here, and I'm going to ask you one more thing. I want you to roll over every Liberal left in the country.
That's Conservative Senator David Tkachuk, and he was addressing a convoy of mostly Alberta truckers who traveled to Ottawa. But comments like this, Wernick says, is why he's lamenting the state of political discourse in this country. It is unusual for a civil servant of his stature to speak so candidly. So here is Michael Wernick's opening statement for the record.
I think there are a couple of things that need to be clarified. I worry about my country right now. I'm deeply concerned about my country right now, and its politics and where it's headed. I worry about foreign interference in the upcoming election, and we're working hard on that. I worry about the rising tide of incitements to violence when people use terms like treason and traitor in open discourse. Those are the words that lead to assassination. I'm worried that somebody's going to be shot in this country this year during the political campaign. I think it's totally unacceptable that a member of the Parliament of Canada would incite people to drive trucks over people after what happened in Toronto last summer. Totally unacceptable, and I hope that you as parliamentarians are going to condemn that. I worry about the reputations of honorable people who have served their country being besmirched and dragged through the market square. I worry about the trolling from the vomitorium of social media entering the open media arena. Most of all, I worry about people losing faith in the institutions of governance of this country. And that's why these proceedings are so important. Should Canadians be concerned about the rule of law in this country? No. The Globe and Mail article contains errors, unfounded speculation, and in some cases is simply defamatory. There was no inappropriate pressure put on the minister at any time. I am quite sure the minister felt pressure to get it right. Part of my conversation with her on December 19th was conveying context that there were a lot of people worried about what would happen.
Canada's top civil servant sharing some strong words with the Justice Committee today. Michael Wernick, the clerk of the Privy Council, says there was no unlawful or inappropriate pressure placed on Jody Wilson-Raybould. So what should we make of his testimony? Are we any closer, for instance, to understanding what actually happened? At issue back for the second time this week, Chantal Hébert returns, and she is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Shachi Kurl joins us from Vancouver tonight. Good to see everybody. We almost did a third at issue this week, I must admit, but I told them you might need a break. So it was pretty extraordinary to hear the clerk of the Privy Council give this, very adamant testimony about how things unfolded. Certainly added lots of details to the things that we had heard. Let me just get your first impressions, if I can, and I'll start with you, Chantal, on what was important to you in terms of what Wernick said.
Well, to start off with what maybe was not the most important, the Justice Committee did not turn into a partisan circus.
Yes.
And allowed people to speak out. What was new was that for once, someone with his face on what he was saying, was speaking in complete sentences and answering questions. So that's new. It's not someone whispering or someone throwing a line in a scrum. I think what I took from it, the first thing is that there are 3 people who spoke to Jody Wilson-Raybould in that adventure. The Prime Minister, Jerry Butts, and the clerk. And all 3, you can expect now, are on the same page. They all felt that they were not crossing any lines in what they were doing, and yes, they did speak with her. That is also clear from testimony. And what I took, what makes Mr. Wernick different from the other 2 is that no longer can you say some political operator gone rogue on the orders of the Prime Minister crossed the line, because the clerk of the Privy Council's job is to tell the Prime Minister and Jerry Butts where the lines are.
Yes.
Yes. So if you feel that the Prime Minister and Jerry Butts crossed the line, then the top civil servant, backed with the advice of the civil service, also crossed that line.
Okay, so in terms of the counsel that he was giving, Andrew, because that's primarily his job, not only to sort of make sure they're governing properly, but also to give advice in order to help them implement their policy agenda. Do you view that as something that he should not have done, or something that Jody Wilson-Raybould could have interpreted as pressure?
Well, I guess what I came with is he's moving the line. Initially, we were talking about whether anybody was directed or not, and the Prime Minister, that was his line. Then, sotto voce, behind the scenes, people in the Prime Minister's office, unnamed, would say, well, we didn't put any pressure on her. He wouldn't say that, but they said it. We never put any pressure on her. Now we're hearing we didn't put inappropriate pressure on her. So we're moving closer and closer, it seems to me, to the point where you say, well, maybe we pressured her, but we were okay in doing so because we had these important objectives we wanted to achieve. So we're moving the line from what was previously unimaginable and quite improper to, well, it's maybe a gray area, maybe not so improper. I also found a lot of his testimony strange. That statement off the top when he talked about, people are going to get shot in campaigns and a bunch of stuff that was not germane to this issue whatsoever. And some of the commentary, frankly, sounded like he was cheerleading for the government. So it was an odd day and an odd performance all round. But look, he's also one of the people that Jody Wilson-Raybould, it seems, is going to suggest had inappropriately pressured her. So yeah, he clearly was contradicting that.
What did you take from it, Shachi?
Oh, it's unprecedented. So first of all, the idea of a clerk, the clerk of the Privy Council, this is supposed to be this eminence grise in background, having difficult and maybe testy or 4-letter word conversations in background. It's not supposed to come out in public. And so to hear Mr. Wernick swinging for the fences today really did catch my eye. The other piece of it, though, is that, a lot of what he was saying, a lot of it of what Mr. Lametti was talking about, if you just looked at it sort of in a vacuum, oh yes, it could be seen as very reasonable. We didn't mean to pressure. The intent wasn't to pressure. We can't speak to what Jody Wilson-Raybould took away from those conversations. The intent wasn't there. But of course, that doesn't explain why she was dropped from cabinet. So that is the piece that sticks with me, and the circle that doesn't square. And I think that is what a lot of people who are watching this from outside the Beltway are taking away, which is, okay, all of the recasting of the tone and the tenor of these 3 conversations may go some way to appear to smooth things over, but of course, at the end of the day, this is very much about the appearance of a raw exercise of power. You didn't do what we wanted, Jody Wilson-Raybould, you're out. And we don't have a good explanation for why.
Chantal, then Andrew. Chantal, then Andrew.
But it also opens up a question that I personally have had since the beginning. And I think anyone who is on principle left a job to resist pressure to one's independence would understand why that question would be there. If you feel you're unduly pressured, why would you not resign? And if you feel that you are confirmed in your suspicion, if it's only a suspicion by being offered a demotion, why would you not resign? Why would you do nothing about it and question if the Globe and Mail hadn't come out with a story based on anonymous sources, would Ms. Wilson-Raybould still be the Minister of Veterans Affairs?
Andrew.
Those are certainly questions worth answering. Another question is why, if you can understand if there is maybe a misinterpretation, You know, people had different ideas about what was intended.
Right.
Maybe she gets that mistaken impression at the time.
Right.
Why would she still have that impression today and have that impression so strongly, it appears, that she was willing to resign from cabinet over it? That doesn't seem to me to add up. That once you've explained to her, listen, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, that's not what we intended at all.
Yeah.
If she's not taking that as sincere, there's probably worth finding out why.
Well, and it does seem like she had to be reassured on that point multiple times by the Prime Minister, the clerk, and others that the decision was hers. And so, to your point, why by reassured? Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she did take the decision, and then it feels certainly, I guess, that she took a hit for it.
So it sounds like she had weeks of meetings in which people were laying on, quote unquote, appropriate pressure on her. And there's real questions as to whether any of those conversations should really have happened. People keep invoking the quote-unquote Shawcross doctrine, which is that the Attorney General can go and solicit advice from her cabinet colleagues. That's a very different thing than the Prime Minister calling her in or sending Jerry Butts to meet her or sending Michael Wernick to meet her. Those are very different types of situations.
Yeah, except we also found out today that those meetings, the Prime Minister meeting, the clerk meeting, were actually about different issues where there was already a problem between.
Sure. My point is, unsolicited advice
okay.
is a very different thing than solicited advice.
Okay. I want to play the clip of Jody Wilson-Raybould though, so that we can talk a little bit more about her. But I think it's important to play this clip again because it left me with a lot of questions again yesterday about where we are. So here's what she said yesterday in the House.
I understand fully that Canadians want to know the truth and want transparency. Privilege and confidentiality are not mine to waive, and I hope that I have the opportunity to speak my truth.
I mean, that went off like, you know, everyone was stunned by that. What do we take from that? I'll start with you, Shachi, and then go through everybody.
Well, it says to me, and I think Canadians take from it, and we've seen from 2 out of 3 polls released this week, that they are not entirely satisfied with whatever explanations are being proffered, and that there is more to come, or there is a sense of we're not quite there yet. So there's like the stink factor, and then there's the stick factor. The stink factor is what the Liberal government, despite sort of using all the air freshener in the can this week, have not been able to make go away. The next question is, how long does this last? And we have seen over the last 3 days a steady drip, drip, drip of everything's fine, oh, bombshell. Everything's okay, new information, new allegations, new things coming out. So clearly, Jody Wilson-Raybould has a truth to tell. That truth does not look like it bodes well or augurs well for this Liberal government, because at the end of the day, she still appears to be at odds with whatever happened, whether it was legal or over a line or under a line. And again, I take 10 steps back and say, well, okay, what do voters in an election year take away from this? And they take away from the fact that, look, this is a government that campaigned on being clean and doing government differently and more respectfully and more transparently. And they can't see, they don't see that right now. It's not on brand.
Voters, the expression "my truth," I think today is clearer than it was even yesterday. Voters are going to have to choose between the word of the Prime Minister, the clerk of the Privy Council, and Jerry Butts versus hers, clearly. Her version is not going to match theirs, and theirs are going to be similar. And voters will have to judge. I'm not sure that the test of truth is that she says the same thing as they do or that they say as she does. I don't think it's that clear. And I think by now she's well aware that her perception is not going to be confirmed by any of the other players in those exchanges.
Or even worse, Andrew, she goes in next week and she tells pretty much the same version of events, but it's through her lens where she feels she's been pressured. And then I don't know how you figure out what happened if it's a very similar version, because it's just one person's view of it, is it not?
First thing to point out is that when she came out of that cabinet meeting, there was a lot of talk about there'd been some rapprochement. Now, well, that's clearly not the case. We've since learned that they made her wait for 2 hours before they allowed her in. That when she was in there, she did tell them that she felt she'd been inappropriately pressured. And then the cabinet, having heard that, then trotted out and voted against having a public inquiry into this. So that implicates a lot more than just Jerry Butts and the Prime Minister. We now have cabinet ministers who know what she knows, or what she's told them she knows, and have acted as they have acted. I do think that even if it's, frankly, even if it's on Michael Wernick's account, when you work through what they were asking her to do. So was she going to go and direct the Director of Public Prosecutions to drop the charges against SNC-Lavalin on grounds of the economic impact it would do? That's actually not allowed under the law. And there's several reasons to think that SNC-Lavalin was actually not eligible for that special treatment. So I don't think people have kind of worked through exactly how many steps would have to fall into place for this simple act, supposedly, of asking the Attorney General to intervene, for that actually to translate into anything that SNC-Lavalin or the government actually wanted to happen here. I don't think they fully thought this through, frankly.
Chantal, what's it again? Yeah.
Just one word. I am not concluding that people vote against the public inquiry or that the debate over whether a public inquiry is one necessary and be the appropriate vehicle based on what they heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould at the cabinet meeting. There are a host of reasons to think long and hard before setting up public inquiries.
I gotta go. I'm gathering we're going to talk about this some more, so don't fear not. Before we go, though, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week we're talking about the other story that rolled through Ottawa this week. Probably didn't get the attention that it would have normally, but the convoy. So look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/.